Greetings and welcome. My name is Ryan O'Rourke and I truly hope you find delight in today's demonstration. Now if you have any questions or inquiries regarding today's tutorial, I implore you to send me a message either on Facebook or leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. Now all of that being said, let's begin. So we're going to begin our painting of the flower with the top inner portion of the petals. And I'm going to do so with just a basic red pigment, and I'm creating, it's going to sound kind of funny, but it's like a boomerang shape. It's like an extended half moon. So you're making a half moon shape in whatever direction you want, and then you're highly pulling out one side of it and extending all of it. From there, I'm going in and I'm dragging a little bit of the pigment down where the light is still going to be hitting that portion of the petal, because we know that the majority of the light is going to hit the top of all of these petals. However, the light will also filter down slightly in varying areas depending upon where the light source is. In this scenario, the light source is going to be in the top left of the painting itself. And so all of the petals located in the top left-hand corner are going to be a little bit brighter. Now here I'm just taking more red pigment and I'm layering it on top of my previously done areas, primarily in the areas that will be brightest. Because when you layer on that initial coat of red, it's going to blend into the background a little bit, and so it's not going to be as vibrant or as pungent as it could be. And so you're only going to achieve that by continuously layering more layers over one another. So as we get down in a lower portion, you'll notice that the pieces of the petals are getting much larger, and they are creating a base and a foundation. We're no longer just working with the heads of the petal. Here is a perfect example of making a mistake. I love to include that because I like to show you that even with simple tutorials like with this, even after you've been doing this for a long time, you still make mistakes. And that's completely fine because you can just paint over it. You shouldn't be afraid to try anything in painting because you can always remedy it. You can always go back. You can always repaint it. And in the very least, it is teaching you a lesson. And a lesson in painting is generally so much more valuable than doing a great painting, because then you can always do another great painting. You can do so much more when you learn. And so I definitely advocate trying things, even if you're a little bit afraid. Now, all of that being said, I've let a lot of the top of it dry. I've been going back, I've been allocating more red to these areas that are going to be highlighted, and I'm just ensuring that it's very bright and it's popping. And within the color scheme here, it's very basic. If you wanted to do more of a classical style of painting, something which is more highly regarded, then I wouldn't recommend using a black at all. Mix a burnt umber and a blue. However, if you're just beginning and you want to get an idea of the coloring, of the shape, of the contrast, then I think this can be really helpful. And I did this in the way that I did just to ensure that if you're a beginner, if you're just starting, that you can confidently work through it and enjoy the process. From there you can learn more about color and all of that, but this is a really good, easy way to start. Now, you notice that again, I'm just highlighting. That has been half of my comments throughout this video. Just going back, finding the areas that are lighter and doing that. That's because painting is about layering. Putting one layer of paint down generally isn't sufficient. And when you're working with a multitude of colors, you can really build really beautiful, vibrant, interesting palettes on your painting. So here you'll notice also that the right side of the flower, it's very dark, and that's because the light is hitting it on the left side. However, parts of the left are also going to be slightly darker because pieces of these petals are casting shadows upon other parts. You'll notice that in the larger portion of the main petal on the left middle quadrant of the flower. It's very bright on the left, and then it gets a little bit darker because the petal above it is casting a shadow on it. You need to be cognizant of your shadows and how all of that works. So here, again, I'm just highlighting. I'm trying to create more complicated lines within it. I'm just throwing in a red line here and there just to ensure that it isn't boring. You want to make sure that a lot of these petals, yes, they're going to be similar in shape when they're not put together, but when they're in this flower, they're being bended and twisted, and you need to ensure that they look fairly different to ensure that it's interesting. Now, with all of that in mind, I'm going in and I'm adding another lighter layer. This time, I'm using a lot of white mixed in with my red. And this is just going to be to make sure we are really highlighting the areas that need to be done. So there's a decent amount of water mixed in with this as well, because I want it fairly light and I want to be able to move it around. I also don't want it to completely take up the red underneath. I want to build up a layering system of color. And again, if you were using a lot of colors, if you had a burnt umber and a ultramarine blue or a phthalo blue underneath, this would all show through. But here, again, I'm going in and I'm layering, this time with more of a white itself, less water. And I'm only doing this on the highlighted areas. I'm trying to create a gradient from very bright highlights to okay highlights to slightly darker highlights, and then we get into our normal color scheme. We're trying to build it, and that means everything on the top left-hand corner is going to be very bright, very vibrant, and as we move down, it gets a little bit darker, it gets a little bit less vibrant, even with our whites. And you also want to save your whites for just the areas that are really going to pop. So although I added white on all of the flower, I'm going back and I'm subduing it, as you can see here. I'm using a mixture of pink, and I'm using a little bit of black again, just to sharpen and darken various areas. I'm just ensuring that none of these areas are going to stand out as much as the main part of our subject. And going back and layering all of this red over the white, over the red, over the black, it's creating a much different aesthetic than what we had before. It looks much more full. It looks like it has layers within it. And you'll notice, if you go back to look at the rows before we incorporated all of the white and pink, the light water washes, it's going to look very different from what it does now, even though we're still using the same colors. Now here I'm taking yellow and I'm incorporating it into the painting, and I'm using a very light wash, and I'm just trying to diversify a lot of this rose, because again, when you're working with one color, it can look fairly illustrated, flat, cartoony, and I painted this initially in one color just to make it very easy. However, if you want to challenge yourself, in the beginning stages, try mixing in a lot of colors, or do it in this post stage where we're just adding them in after the fact. It's not as effective, but you can definitely use it to learn about how to mix colors where you want colors. And here I'm mixing a lot of blues. Because it's a darker tone, it's a cooler tone, I'm mixing that into the black areas. Generally in painting, you want to make sure that you don't really have much black, and this is a way to ensure of avoiding that after using the black, because using black, it's a very easy way of painting, and then after the fact you can kind of add in the colors, and then eventually once you have a good understanding of color, you don't have to use the black at all. But again, it is a very easy way to get started, and I wouldn't worry about using it or kind of discrediting your piece by using it initially to learn, because again, learning is the most important piece of all of this. Now here I'm going in and I'm adding cracks and little tears within the flower. Not too many, but just enough. And you saw that I made some mistakes, and that's completely fine. Now from there, I'm going in and I'm working on the leaf area. And I'm taking a lot of green pigment mixed with white. I'm going around the edges of these leaves in a fairly rough motion with my brush, and then I'm dragging the pigment back in towards the middle from each side. So I'm making sure that the pigment has a decent amount of water on it, enough so that I can drag the paint, and I'm trying to do this with a fairly rough stroke, ensuring that you do actually see the stroke, because the stroke of the brush is going to mimic that of the movement of the actual leaf itself. So you really want to ensure that you are using the brush to its full capacity. Now here I'm also just adding in a little bit of a stem. I'm using the same color. You generally want to use the same colors within the piece to add a cohesive nature, and I highly advise doing that. And even mixing some green into the rose can be beneficial. I tried to do that by mixing the yellow and the blue. But here, much like the rose, I'm going back and I'm highlighting, because again, when you're working on a black, when you're working on a very dense dark color, sometimes the highlights don't really pop after it dries. And so now I'm going in, I'm mixing a white with a green. Again, I'm being very rough around the edges, and then I'm dragging the pigment back in towards the middle. I've also added a line in the middle of each of these pieces of foliage as well, just to add a little bit of an extra dimension. Now you can make these very detailed, but I wanted to keep it simple. I wanted to ensure that it was easy to follow along. And again, much like the rose, I'm trying to incorporate inconsistencies into the foliage. So these leaves, they're not going to be perfect at all. In fact, you want them to be slightly bent. Some of them are going to have cracks or breaks within them. And again, the ones on the left side are going to be brighter. As you move towards the back, as you move towards the bottom right hand corner, it gets much darker because the flower itself is going to cast a shadow upon these leaves as well. And you need to be very cognizant of that and how shadows and light work together in that scenario. However, I am still going to add a little bit of white, a little bit of green mixed into that back area, and then I'm using yellow. Again, I did that in the main rose, and I'm doing that here. We're trying to create a cohesive nature. We're trying to make the colors much more interesting. Generally, when you're using a color out of the tube, it can be fairly boring, and so I like to mix colors with washes. And yellow, it's a great color to wash with because generally it's not very thick itself, and you can just add a lot of water to it and just pour it on your painting. You won't lose any of the detail, and it can be a really great tool to, again, add a cohesive nature and make it interesting. So again here, I'm just taking a white, a mix of yellow and green, and I'm adding highlights to varying areas of the foliage, again just accentuating them. However, I still want my flower to pop more than anything else, so I am keeping that in mind, and I'm not using a true white. It is a blend and a mix. I'm also ensuring to remember shadows. As you'll notice at the top of the stem, it's a little bit darker, and that's because the foliage itself is casting a shadow onto it. So I hope you've enjoyed. Again, if you need help with drawing the rose, there is a link in the description. And if you've liked what you've seen here, please hit that subscribe button and leave a comment. It helps me so much, and I thank you. Thank you so much for watching. I truly hope you've enjoyed. And again, if you have any questions or inquiries regarding today's work or anything else you've been working on, please feel free to leave me a comment, send me a message, and you can actually send me your work on my Facebook page, where I'd be more than happy to provide for you a constructive, positive critique where we can just talk about art. It's a friendly, creative space, and I welcome you to join me there. Now, that being said, if you look in the description of this video, you will also find a link to my mailing list. And upon signing up for that, you can receive free real-time videos, extra tips, tricks, videos. There's a myriad of things to explore, and I hope to explore them with you. Now, if you'd like anything specific done, tutorial-wise, please let me know. I'd take requests, and I'd be more than happy to help you in any way that I can. Now, all of that being said, I'd just like to thank you for taking the time out today, watching this with me, spending the time here, hitting that like button, that subscribe button, leaving a comment. Every little thing you do here, it matters immensely to me, and I just can't tell you how grateful I am. So thank you, and have a wonderful day.